Originally, this video was going to be a deep dive into the DCT and electronic suspension of this standard, more off-road based Honda CRF1100L Africa Twin. But after writing the script for the video, I decided to do a full review on the bike because there's so much more I want to say about it. I've already produced a first impressions video on the bike and the significant differences between this one and the Adventure Sports model. So if you're into the Adventure Sports model, maybe check that one out too. And I've already reviewed the Adventure Sports model on my channel here as well. So if you're more into that bike, I'll leave a link to that video in this video's description. So my review isn't going to go over every single spec and detail of the bike, just the things that I found interesting that I thought you might like to know. The Africa Twins were significantly updated in 2024, and in that first impressions video, I went over all of those changes. So this video isn't going to be a double up of the first impressions video I made, more of a look at what I learned over the time I had with the bike, what I liked, what I didn't like, and whether or not I'd select DCT and electronic suspension, or let's call it ES, for an Africa Twin if I was speccing one up. I've done a good mix of riding on this bike, from off-road to motorway, errands, and two up. Most of the riding I've done was to get to and from the trails that I ride. Here in the UK, we have a trail system called the Trans-European Trail, or TET, which is a trail system that actually goes all the way across Europe. I ride the TET a lot because it's got a great variety of terrain, as you can see in this video. So I've probably ridden 40% off-road and 60% on, and most of the riding I've been doing on the bike on the road was to get to the off-road tracks. If I owned the bike, I'd probably ride it on the sort of off-road tracks I'm riding here now. I personally own a Yamaha Tenere World Raid, which I use for on and off-road. And although I don't do hardcore off-road on the bike, I do use it for off-road, and it's still on its standard tyres. I think you just need to know your limits with these bikes, and if you do, they're just so much fun. I've had some experts in the comment section of the first video tell me that the bike is too expensive and too heavy to be used as an enduro bike. Well, first of all, it's not an enduro bike, it's an adventure bike, and we can have whatever fun we want on our bikes if we buy them. Yeah, it's not the lightest bike in the world, but it is fun to ride like this. It's fairly limited by its stock tyres, but I don't think I'd want to be riding this bike anywhere that needed knobby tyres, because it'd be too heavy to pick up and too much of a hassle to clean. Standard tyres are good for the dry and moistish conditions, but won't do well with this bike in the mud because it's too heavy for that. Plus it's just so nice I wouldn't want to drop it. My initial impressions of the bike were that it was such a great place to be and that everything felt good and in the right spot when you're riding it. I've ridden a few bikes over the years with this engine, and whatever bike it's in, it's a great companion to have along on the ride. Riding position is upright and really neutral for me on the bike, and the reach feels natural to the bars. When you're standing up off-road on the bike, it also feels really comfortable and neutral, and you can move your weight around easily. If I owned the bike, I'd probably add some riser bars so I can stand a bit more upright when I'm riding along off-road, but no big deal. I always add these to my bikes anyway. Controls are all high quality and all feel great. This bike's got handguards, but they look more like wind deflectors more than sturdy off-road ones that you could bash into things with. If I owned the bike, I'd probably add some bark busters to it. I actually like the look of the bike, but the overall design of it hasn't really changed since its introduction in 2016. Here's a list of all the things I've been working on since I've had the bike, which I'll go over in this video. First up, removed foot peg rubbers. That was an easy one. Set up the levers and the brake pedals to suit me. I should say lever. Check the suspension preload on the bike, how it was delivered to me, and set it up as best I could to match my rider weight. I also moved towards using user 1 and user 2 settings and really getting to know them. The engine on this bike is great, and it's got so many personalities with the rider modes and the DCT, and whether you're riding it in auto or manual. Capacity of the engine is 1084cc, and it's got a 270-degree crank, and it's a parallel twin. Power is just over 100 horsepower, and torque is 112 newton meters or 82 foot-pounds if you're in the States. I love the exhaust note of this bike and definitely wouldn't change it for an aftermarket one. I just don't think it needs it. The bike comes with 4 standard rider modes: urban, tour, gravel, and off-road. Within these standard rider modes, nothing can be customized, and they have set parameters. When I first rode the bike, I used these for my first ride and flicked between them when I was riding around. They're a good starting point if you're just jumping on the bike and want to get a feel for it, but if you want to fine-tune the bike, you'll need to go into user 1 and user 2 settings. I use user 1 for road and user 2 for off-road. I will go over how I set up the user modes a bit later in the video. I'm a bit of a purist at heart, and it's taken me ages to get into the DCT, but I've recently ridden a few bikes that have it, and I have some thoughts on it now. The very first thing it's worth saying here is the immediate thing I do when I get on a bike with an automatic gearbox is select auto and get going. It's sort of a, path of least resistance thing, and I only ever really click it into manual when I want to open it up if the moment arises. I think the way Honda does their DCT really suits the way I like to ride. I owned a Honda Dominator for about 10 years once. That bike has a 650cc single-cylinder engine, and back then they were marketed as trail or dual sport bikes. The joy in these big single-cylinder engine bikes was that they were lovely to ride down low in the rev range and just thump along. And when the Africa Twin is in DCT mode, it changes just like I would change on my Dominator back then. The DCT on the Africa Twin also has a sport mode within the auto setting that changes where the bike changes up and down in the rev range when you're riding. I wanted to enjoy the sport mode, and I tried it loads, but for the way I like to ride the Africa Twin, it didn't suit it. And I always just wanted to click it back into the standard auto. If you're someone who really likes to ride an engine hard, you'll probably enjoy this, but I didn't. The DCT shifts lovely through the gears, and there's not lag at all when it changes, no matter where you are in the rev range. It's just super smooth. With some automatic gearboxes, you have to learn how they like to work and then ride around that. Not this one. It's seamless. With these big adventure bikes, I think the best way to ride fast-ish and controlled off-road is to use their torque and not rev the engines, because they can easily get out of control, especially on the little tight tracks we have here in the UK. It would be a different story though if I lived in Australia or in the States, where they have deserts where you can really open these bikes up. DCT on the Africa Twin adds 11 kgs to its overall weight. While we're talking about weight, ES adds another 2 kgs. So the overall wet weight of this bike is 244 kgs. The bike feels its weight too. And what I mean by that is it doesn't feel heavy or light. It just feels 244 kgs. Would I add DCT to the bike if I was buying it? That would actually depend on how I was going to use the bike. If I was going to buy an Africa Twin, I'd definitely buy this more off-road version of the bike. I have ridden the Adventure Sports, as I said, which is the more touring road-based model, and I did really like it, but I'd want my adventure bike to be able to do off-road too. So if I was getting the off-road model, I'd not go with a DCT because I prefer a clutch and a gearbox for off-road. For me, I like to be able to use a clutch to get the back wheel spinning quickly and sometimes drop it to clear mud from the back wheel. And with the DCT, you sort of have to ride around how the bike likes to ride. I also found when I was using the DCT bike, I was just setting it in auto anyway when I was off-road, and I didn't enjoy shifting with the triggers on the left-hand side of the controls. If I was more of a road rider and I was buying the Adventure Sports model though, I'd add the DCT because it takes a lot of energy out of changing gears on the road. Not that changing gears is exhausting, but it's easy to get fatigued when riding on the road, and sometimes you just want the easiest solution possible. Plus the gearbox changes how I like to ride anyway, so it would be a good shortcut. Frame of the bike is made of steel, and I think the red frame looks great on this one. Fuel tank is 18.8 litres and has about 15 miles left when the red light starts flashing. I know this because I ran out of fuel on the bike with my wife on the back. We were only local and the place I liked to go had run out of fuel, so I had to go somewhere else. My logic was that the bike manufacturers are so conservative with their empty gauges these days. Turns out Honda aren't. But what this does mean is that I know that the bike does 217 miles per tank of fuel. Initially when I rode the bike, I felt it was skinny in the midsection at the seat in relation to the foot pegs. After having ridden the bike for a while, I don't notice it at all. In fact, just on how the bike feels, it does feel like a big dirt bike in that almost nothing gets in your way when you're moving around off-road, and you can move around on the bike with almost no restrictions. Some manufacturers' bikes I ride aren't meant to be ridden off-road, and they don't feel very good to ride because when you're moving around, things just get in your way. Because I've got size 12 boots, things around the foot controls usually stand out to me in that I hit them on things on the bike. Last year I rode a Moto Guzzi 85T Strada for my other channel, which is called the Classic Motorcycle channel. When I rode that bike, I put the balls of my feet on the pegs, which is how I like to ride as a neutral position. And when I did that, the pillion pegs splayed the back of my feet out, so my legs were twisted, and it made the ride feel really odd. Not on the Honda, everything feels right between your legs, and you can move your feet around the pegs how you like, and it all feels really even down there. Also, check out these frame protectors. I think they really help the bike feel even between your legs. The ground clearance on the bike is 250 millimeters, and it doesn't feel low to me for this type of bike. The exhaust pipe and pillion pegs do stick out a bit, and I hit my leg on the right-hand side one when I was paddling through a rut on the bike. Here's the bruise from that. Also, check out the damage to the exhaust pipe guard. It's only a soft guard, and I suppose it's done its job, so that's good. I like the bash plate on the bike, and the rear disc brake guard is cool. Mud guards are great on this bike. Take a look under here. Minimal places for the mud to get stuck, and it looks like it clears away the mud from under here really well. That's Honda's off-road heritage there, just shining through. The seat has two settings for height, 850 millimeters or 870 millimeters. You can also get a low seat option that goes as low as 825 millimeters, and there's also the comfort seat too, which is 885 millimeters. So that's a bit higher than the standard seat. I rode the bike in the high setting on the standard seat, which was a good height for me. By the way, I'm 6'1" with a 32-inch inseam and long arms and legs. I don't mind a tall bike, and my Tenere seat height is 890 millimeters, which does feel a bit tall with the spring weights set to my rider weight, but I don't mind, and I really only notice it when I'm doing technical work off-road or putting my feet down to stop. Seat comfort was great for long days in the saddle. On the previous Adventure Sports model, I rode a lot on the road, and this one feels the same. As I said, I took the rubber mounts out of the foot pegs, so I had grip on the pegs when I was riding it off-road. The pegs looked small, but they didn't really feel that small when I was riding the bike. I have seen that you can spec the bike up with rally foot pegs. I'll go over my ideal spec towards the end of the video. The bike has a great turning circle, and it's easy to move around at slow speeds. I like the screens on these Africa Twins, and they have great wind protection. This one's got 5 stops of adjustment, but I either used it up on the motorway and down everywhere else most of the time. A downside of the screen is that you have to use 2 hands to adjust its height, so adjusting it on the fly means taking both hands off the bars. Also, sometimes it chooses to go up diagonally in its mounts and get stuck. Not a big deal, but a thing. Oh, and while we're on the motorway, I forgot to mention before, vibration is good, and I didn't get numb hands from it coming up through the bars, which is always something to look out for me. Engine does feel like it's revving a bit on the motorway when you're at 70 miles an hour. Looks like it's just running at just under 4,000 RPM here. Front wheel is 21 inches and the back's 18, which are good sizes for riding off-road. Rims are tubeless style, and I have noticed that they stick out a bit at the side. Not an issue for mild off-road, but if you're riding ruts and rocks a lot, maybe it would be easier to get them scratched up. Tyres are tubeless, Metzler Karoo Streets, which I like on this bike. If I owned the bike, I wouldn't change the tyres because I think they suit it. Brakes are excellent on this bike, and it's got road and off-road ABS, and also the ABS can be turned off when you're riding off-road too. When I was riding off-road, I mainly just used the off-road ABS setting, which I found was great. Usually I have to turn the back wheel ABS off at least on adventure bikes. Not this one though, standard off-road ABS, perfect for me. One thing that stood out to me when I first rode this bike, and also the adventure sports model I had before, was how stuck to the road the bike feels when you're riding it. I think the whole package just works so well together, and it just feels so connected to the road, and the inputs that you make when you're riding the bike can be really felt. These bikes have been out for ages, and I've only ridden one for the first time this year, and now this is my second. The DCT model of this bike comes with a handbrake, because of course you can't stick it into gear to stop it rolling on a hill or something like that. That's the handbrake at the front there. This bike is equipped with Showa's ERA suspension, which means electronically equipped ride adjustment. With the standard, more off-road version of the Africa Twin, this one, ERA is an option you can select. With the adventure sports model, it comes standard. In simple terms, Showa's ERA is a smart electronic suspension system that uses sensors to automatically and instantly adjust the bike's damping based on the road conditions, your speed, and your riding style. It constantly adapts to give you the best possible ride without you doing any manual adjustments to the damping at all. You can also set the preloader on the bike using the menu system, depending on the load you've got on it, like if you've got a pillion or luggage. One significant thing I have learned about the suspension is that the preload only works on the back shock, not on the front forks, which I initially thought it did. Just for reference, suspension travel on the standard Africa Twin bike is 220mm on the rear and 230mm on the front. As I've said, the bike has 4 basic rider modes and 2 customizable modes called User 1 and User 2. Within User 1 and User 2, you can select the overall way you want your suspension to react. Here's the overall broad settings you can select with the suspension within User 1 and User 2. So first there's mid for easy handling in a wide range of situations. It's automatically selected within urban riding mode. Hard is stable, responsive, and the firmest damping for 2-up and fully laden touring. It's also selected within tour riding mode. Soft offers a comfortable, secure ride on poor roads with the lowest damping force. It's automatically selected within gravel riding mode. Off-road gives optimum dirt performance with better damping there. It's automatically selected within off-road riding mode. Within the menu system, you can also isolate and fine-tune the front and back over and above these overall settings with additional soft, medium, and hard settings. I'm going to talk about suspension sag now because this was one of the things that first attracted me to the ES model, and I like that it can be set in the menu system of the bike. Worth saying here that not everyone adjusts the suspension sag on their bikes, but some people do, and some people even go so far as to change their springs out to get them exactly right for their weight, and I'm one of those people. When I'm setting up my own bikes, my starting point for sag measurements is around 30% rider sag on the front and back, then I go from there. So when I say rider sag, I mean 30% of the overall travel with me sat on the bike. So if the bike has 220 millimeters travel on the rear, the correct rider sag would be 66 millimeters. So 30% of 220. I also take the static sag into consideration, which is the sag the bike has without the rider on it, just under its own weight. Ideal static sag for a bike is 10 to 15% of its overall travel. When I initially measured the sag on the Africa Twin, I discovered that the forks have 39% rider sag and 28.6% static sag, and the rear has 41% rider sag and 18.5% static sag. So what these settings tell me is that the spring weights within the fork and shock are way off for my rider weight of 93.5 kgs. Changing springs on press bikes is out of the question for me for the time that we have the bikes. So the next best thing I can do to make the bike feel good for me is balance out the front and the back suspension. Within the menu settings, the preload has 24 steps of preload that you can select. So I wound it right on, and now I have 38% rider sag and 16% static sag on the back, which sort of matches the front sag of 39%, much better now. So the whole goal of matching them all up was to get the bike's geometry feeling balanced and neutral for me. Okay, onto the real world. So how'd it feel once they were set up as best they could be? Well, my overall opinion of this suspension on this bike is that it is excellent. Both on and off-road, the forks are lovely and soft in their initial part of the travel, and even when faced with big hits off-road, they don't bottom hard, and they still feel soft, and they hold up really well in their travel. Actually, I can't remember bottoming the fork or the back hard at all. With the stock tyres on the road, the bike feels lovely and planted, and it's one of the smoothest adventure bikes on the road I think I've ever ridden. The last adventure sports model I rode was also like this too. Even with a preload not completely right, the bike stays up high in its travel, even when going over uneven surfaces, and dials in just the right amount of damping at all times. While I had the bike, I never felt like the suspension got out of its depth, even when riding it hard off-road. So would I add the Showa ERA suspension to the Africa Twin if I was buying the bike? Short answer, yes. I think the electronic compression and rebound damping on the forks and shock is excellent, and I love the idea of being able to dial in the preload quickly through the menu system depending on the load. With this year's Africa Twin, when you upgrade to the electronic suspension, you also get heated grips and an ACC socket too, so there is that. Also worth noting that you can only get this color with the electronic suspension model. Downsides to Showa's ERA suspension? Well, maybe there's additional complication involved when swapping the springs out. Also, longer term, they might cost more to service than traditional forks and shocks without the electronics. But how often do normal riders service their forks and shocks on their adventure bikes anyway? Also, there's more to go wrong with the bike's electronics that a normal person can't fix themselves. Just want to go through the user mode so you can see how I've got them set up on this bike. So user 1 I've been using for road. So traction control has to stay on road there. You'll see how that works later on in the menu system. HSTC, basically traction control, always had that set to 1. Wheelie control, had that set to 1. Preload can be preload with rider, pillion and luggage, and you can have a combination of all those. G is gravel mode. Use that in off-road mode though. So this is just a quick reference to how you've got things set up in your menu. So power is set to 1. 1 is actually the most power. You'll see that in a bit. EB, engine braking, set to 1, so that's the most. Traction control, set to 1, so that links up with that. G is gravel mode. ABS, on, road. Suspension, set to medium. So I'll just show you user 2, which is what I've been using for off-road. So have been either selecting ABS on or off here. These settings mirror what I've got them set to for the road mode. Gravel mode, I have been using that on and off-road. So select that, it turns gravel mode on. It just minimizes the clutch slip that the DCT does when you're riding off-road, so it makes the handling more, or the power more predictable. These are the same. Suspension is set to off-road. So I'll just go into this menu system a little bit deeper so you can see how I've got it all set up. User modes, remember that's my road setting, so I'll go and show you in there. Power set to 1, engine braking 1, overall suspension I've had it set to medium. Front suspension set to medium as well. Back suspension set to medium too. These are just fine tuning settings. So you've got your overall setting, but then you've got more fine tuning that you can do if you want. So if you want the back a little bit stiffer in the medium setting, you can set it that. ABS, on-road here and off-road. Preload set to max. Then you've got all your other settings there. Show you my off-road mode, very similar. Except suspension is set to off-road. Damping all set to medium and ABS set to off-road too, which is actually not a bad setting. So yeah, that's that. TFT display is great on the bike, and there's also a touch screen, although I didn't use that feature that much and I preferred to use the left-hand side controls to move through the menu system. It's nice and bright and it's easy to read. The bike's got Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, which is a big deal for some people, but I didn't hook it up because you need to connect it to a Bluetooth headset and I don't ride with one of those. LED lights all round, and with the cameras we always use, they seem to have a problem with them all flickering. They don't flicker in real life like this, just in the footage. Cruise control is great on this bike, and I found the best way to use it was to get up to speed and then turn it on with your left hand. I took my wife on the back of the bike and she said the seat was comfortable and she liked the bars on the back to hold on to. And I did notice that I did feel a bit cramped with her on the back, more so than other bikes I ride. And she's only small at 5'2" and she weighs about 55 kgs, but still I felt like she was pushing me toward the tank as we were riding along. Six-year warranty on these bikes is really hard to look past if you're buying a new bike and want to keep it for a while. Cost of the base model Africa Twin is £13,399. If you add ES to the cost of the bike, it comes in at £14,899. And if you add DCT as well to the cost of the bike, it's £15,999. Honda have loads of options that you can add to the bike when you buy it. And if I was speccing this bike up, I'd also add a comfort seat, which is a bit taller and has more foam than the stock seat. Front fog lights, so I'm easy to see on the road. Rally pegs for my big feet and more grip off-road. Engine guards for if I drop the bike. Radiator grille to protect the radiator from debris off-road. tank stickers so I don't scratch the tank. If I was adding some luggage, I'd go for the plastic panniers with that enormous 58-litre top box, which can fit 2 helmets. It'd be great for when you're taking your wife on the back, so you don't have to be tethered to your helmet when you stop places. I think you can tell by now that I really like this version of the Africa Twin, and I'd definitely go for this over the Adventure Sports model because it does off-road really well. The engine is a lovely companion on any ride, and the whole package sticks to the terrain like glue, and the DCT and ES, while adding complexity and weight, really do make a difference to how the bike can be ridden. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. That's it. Thanks for watching.